Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned today. I'm very excited. Ben joining us again. This is now 3 or 2? Number 2. Oh.
Yeah.
You made such an impression last time. It was like, wow, that was enough for. Yeah.
2 for the price of 1. I like.
There you go. Exactly. So while I'm talking smack, by all means, smack the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff so you get your email in the morning whenever we go live.
Going on? I love that. Oh, dude, you're in the zone. Keep on cracking.
I was. If you
I
have
know,
any
but
thoughts
pat
or
and interrupt.
comments or
Come on.
you put them in the comment section. Whew. Bring it all down. Here we go.
Right.
Back into the comment section. If you do have any comments or questions, by all means, put them in there, and we will be good to go. We'll engage those as we hit it up. Now, we haven't had you in a little while, Ben. Do you want to give us a little rundown, who you are, where you come from, all that good stuff, and then we can go from there?
You got it. Great to be back on with you guys. Surprised, that I got an invite back, and also too, just unsure, if I'm here to add to the convo or just defend myself against Shaun from multiple angles. So I guess we're going to see by the end where we take that. My name's Ben Frakely. Kind of career in sport and team environments. Most of that in the college and pro sports world, a little bit of time working with special operations forces. I think my mission in life is to bring practical resilience strategies and skills to anybody that I'm fortunate to come into contact with. And I have had about my own company for about 10 years now. It's a full-time thing called Ready, Set, Resilient, and working mostly with professional athletes and some business executives and teams. Have a doctoral degree in sport and performance psychology with a clinical mental health specialization, and am starting to see if I'm any good at pickleball. That's a new area. So Chance, today you shared, what's going on with your shoulder. Who knows? Next time it could be a lower body extremity that I, am claiming as an ailment. I live in Bentonville, Arkansas, which is the home of Walmart. Not sure if you've heard of it, but they're kind of a big deal. And just pumped to be on with you guys. Had a blast last time with just the structure and the banter, and also just this idea that having a sense of community, to talk about ideas and share ideas and socially source them is a really good thing. And I'm excited to be a part of it today. Grateful to be back on.
Awesome. We're excited to have you. I was really looking forward to the conversation this weekend, and don't worry, I'm gonna keep poking you to be on, regardless of how today turns out. Don't worry about that.
Oh, it's gonna be so bad.
We do have a quick couple comments. KH jumps on. He says, "Good day, all. I'm enjoying some Dutch Jacobs coffee. Very, very strong, just like the conversations here." Ooh, there you go. It's gonna be one of those mornings. I like it.
Maybe I got a little bit of chili pepper in my coffee this morning. It's a bit spicy.
There you go. And Jim Elliott, always good to see you, buddy. Morning, guys. Awesome. Shaun, actually, I'll dive into a quick definition before I jump over to you on osmosis. So, osmosis, for those who don't know, is a movement of a solvent, such as water, through a semi-permeable membrane as a living cell into a solution of higher solute concentrate that tends to equalize. I'm not going to go into too much of the science, but the second part of this is a process of absorption or diffusion suggestive of the flow of osmotic action. And it has an example, a usually effortless, often unconscious assimilation, which is the last one I really enjoyed. I think that was a really great point on it. But what's your first thought on osmosis and learning when I put that up earlier today?
Well, first of all, I will establish that I'm happy that Ben is here and that he's got a great sense of humor, because when we're in the green room, we're having a little bit of fun. What Ben is bringing to the table is a large body of work in the academic world, along with a lot of practical experience within the professional athlete and corporate world. So I'm looking forward to learning from Ben through osmosis in this hour. So I think what I'll start off with is referring back to about 45 minutes or so ago. I put a post up on Instagram, understanding that, well, learning this morning that today's topic is osmosis and learning. I figured, how am I going to explain any of this, like my thoughts on this subject out there? And so I started thinking about my various careers and where I learned the most and where I taught the most, because I think in order to understand learning, it helps to be also a teacher. And so, that's an entirely different subject maybe, but I just thought, when have I taught the most and where have I seen the most learning in front of me from people that I'm teaching? So probably when I was a computer system engineer. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll go grab my book. So I grabbed my book and I sat down and staring at the sunshine and thought, I'm just going to open up a random page and see what pops up. Funnily enough, the random page kind of works. So I'm going to pull out the page here right now. I've got my stage prop. It's page 185, and it's a rather large book.
Light reading,
but
right?
yeah, some light reading. But it opened up to this page, and it says user environment profile. And then on the other page, it has user profile path. And in that path, you can see that there's some system default, user default, local user, roaming, and mandatory. Now, all of that stuff is super freaking boring if you're not a computer nerd. And I used to be a computer nerd. So when I cracked that page open, I thought, ooh, how coincidental. I could play with this. I could make a case whereby we all have a user profile in life. And so within the context of what I was explaining in computer system engineering security platform structures is you can enter into any new trajectory. We'll call it a new career path or a new opportunity. And when you enter into that path, you have a user profile. And your user profile I'll refer to loosely as your experience, the things that you understand in life. But as a user profile, as you drop into the operating system software or into the structured network that you're entering into, there's also this thing called an environmental user path. And so that environment that you're stepping into as an individual user with your profile loaded into you, as you step in, your rule set and experiences have to operate in the larger context of the environment you're stepping into. So you might have things within you that say you've got all these amazing skills and talents and etc. But when you step into a new environment, that environment structure has rule sets as well that obligate you not to use those special talents or restrict you from being mega awesome and etc. And so as I was thinking about how all of the cool people that I've met in life can move from environment to environment to environment to environment, freely flowing, naturally, making it seem almost seamless. Those kind of people that I am thinking of right now are people who understand themselves, and then when they step into a new environment, they don't restrict themselves. But what they do is they rapidly learn the environmental rule set that they just stepped into. Does that make sense? So for me, as I was looking at this page, what I thought was this. When I wrote that book, like just over 20 years ago, I had no freaking idea that I'd be using it as a stage prop in a podcast. Because it's ridiculous that I'm podcasting. And so, but here's the funny thing about this, the overarching theme of what I'm trying to make as a point, is as an individual user stepping into a system environment that will limit or control my abilities until I learn how to use them properly with that environment. Each time that you do that, you've got to consider the future that is unknown to you. So when I was writing this book, again, I had no idea that I'd be using it in this moment. But that book as a body of work is part of my operating system, is part of my internal experiences that I can now use in other environmental systems, just like podcasting as the example. So choose wisely or choose carefully when you step into a new system Try to absorb as much of it as you can in the now, but keep an eye to the imaginary future that you can't contextualize yet, because chances are whatever you're doing now will be available to you to use wisely decades in the future.
Bam. That was a mic drop. Well done.
You think?
Ben? Oh,
I don't know,
yeah.
I was just rambling.
Ben, you got any initial thoughts on osmosis and learning?
I would like to be additive here to what Shaun said. You know, when I hear things like system or environment, to me, I don't think you can have a conversation about learning and pinpoint one thing that is going to expedite the learning process for somebody. From a academic standpoint, Knowles has like 5 assumptions, particularly of adult learners. And, the biggest one is about, I wrote this down here, like kind of prepping. As people mature, their self-concept moves from being dependent to being self-directed, which to me is just like, we have to want to learn. And I think that there are things that if I were listening on this podcast right now and I were a coach or a team leader or a squad leader, I'd think there are things that I can be intentional about that are going to motivate the people that I lead or that are in my orbit to get them excited to learn. The great UCLA basketball coach, John Wooden, said, "You haven't taught until they've learned." And I think back to some of my earlier experience as a college coach where I thought, well, I gave my players the information or I shared a vision of my team or I explained the exercise. Why aren't they getting it? And kind of externalizing that. But when I hear Shaun talk, as I've kind of furthered in my career and had the opportunity to watch some great coaches coach, the ownership on, hey, if this is going to be an environment of learning, what do I need to be paying attention to? Those are some of the things that have stood out to me more as the careers, as my kind of journeys continue, which is, yes, the content or the transfer of knowledge is a part of this learning process, but how that gets done, the environmental conditions that are being set up, how much information I'm asking people to process, those are just some of the variables that I think are either speeding up the learner's journey or in some cases slowing it down, even though that may not be our intent.
100%. Shaun, you got any additional?
Yeah, it's easy to play off that because there was a lot of good things to sink my teeth into. And the first thing that comes to mind is the consideration of situational awareness. So I'm going to propose something that might be helpful to other veterans out there as an example. And I'm sure this can apply to almost anyone. Situational awareness. So when I left the teams and I was looking to sink my teeth into the next thing, and eventually I chose computer system engineering. When I stepped into that classroom for the first day, do you think I didn't know what was going on? I didn't know intellectually what was going on, but I had half a foot into that classroom door and I knew exactly what was going on in that classroom. That situational awareness is what I'm talking about. And the moment that I put my butt down in the chair for the first time, as it was touching that seat, I knew everything about that room. But I was looking around the room and I didn't see too many other people that knew what was going on in the room because they'd never learned this term called situationally aware. Paying attention to the hidden messages, the signals that no one's seeing unless you really tune in the now, and make it important to understand what is going on in the now. That's what I was taught with situational awareness, is to understand the now. And when someone walks into a classroom with a sleepy head and a half-eaten pizza in a box and sits down and is not invested in the now, well, they're not situationally aware. So from day one, I was applying tier 1 abilities to my first day in the classroom called How to Become a Computer System Engineer. Day after day, I treated each day like it had a priority mission on it. I was there to maximize my outcome. And as I started to understand the learning environment that I was in, a new learning environment for me, by the way, because I never went to beyond high school before I joined the Army. And so I was having to learn in an entirely different way, but I was learning in a way that I already knew how to, in a way. So my situational awareness, my drive, my focus, my internal competitiveness with myself, all of these things that made me successful in Tier 1 were easily translatable into a classroom. But I had to frame it in language that I understood at that time. And I called it situationally aware. So when then I became a teacher, teaching computer system engineering. It's at that point, it wasn't a case of, whew, I made it. I had enough situational awareness to rapidly absorb a dense material body of work and then start teaching it. Once you're teaching it, the responsibilities increase, they don't decrease. So what I had to do as a teacher was then dial up my situational awareness even more, where I was paying a lot of micro attention to my students in order to, I believe the phrase was, you haven't taught, or sorry, no one has, what did you use? You haven't taught anyone until they've learned, I believe was the phrase, which I've never heard before, which I freaking love. It's almost like a do not pass go until you think about that sentence. And so as a teacher, what I was doing was applying situational awareness in my classroom to better understand not just how a student learned, I was paying attention to how the entire classroom learned. And so you're not situationally aware if you're delivering just to one person in a classroom full of 30 adults. You are missing what's going on in the room. And so my job was to learn how to run that room properly so that they could learn properly as a large group. And then my key to success, I feel, and that's why I was asked to write this book, is I started getting the students to play with each other as teacher and student. I was having them teach each other and learn from each other. And then I would set up a classroom here and a classroom there. And I would have them run speed trials on build servers, create a network, and then attack the other classroom. So I would put them on task. I would have teachers, like I would have a student running the attack classroom and a student running the attack classroom. There's many ways you can engage humans to become responsible learners, excited learners, where they're osmosising in the moment through high-level programming that they may or may not be aware of. There's many things that you can accomplish in a classroom, but nothing will be accomplished until you sit down and think about what are you trying to do in that moment. I hope that makes sense.
Ben, you got any thoughts?
Man, context is everything. So if you don't hear anything else I say today, context is everything. Hearing Shaun talk about, the classroom experiences, it just makes me think, what's transferable in this into other environments, other contexts. And I think a lot of it. What I heard in Shaun's vignette there, and Shaun, if I'm missing this, please, debunk it. You were motivated to learn. You went in with this situational awareness, that whatever you felt you might have been lacking in terms of subject matter expertise or knowledge, you had gained specific experiences from your time in service that increased your readiness to learn. And so that really makes me think about, if for anybody, who's any type of position where they are responsible for the learning of others. It makes me think about what assumptions do I have about the people in front of me? Like assumption number one, everybody here wants to learn, right? Like if I have that as an assumption and it's wrong, that may cause me to go too fast. But then it makes me think about what other assumptions I might have. Like, the first one could be everybody's motivated to learn. The second could be everybody has subject matter expertise in this area, or they want to do this full time for a living. And I think if I go off those assumptions, that stops me doing from what great teachers do, which is stay curious and maybe follow the interest of their learners. That may have prevented me from, Shaun, why are you here? Shaun, what about this class is most interesting to you? And I know this is going off in maybe a little bit different direction, but to me, those types of conversations get into a little bit of vulnerability. I think they start to promote trust, and then you can start to get into an environment where not knowing the answer is okay, but not seeking the answer is not okay. And so you start to create like classroom conditions or team conditions. And I think, if I'm applying that to, watching young team leaders from when I worked as a mental performance coach at with 75th Ranger Regiment, or watching squad leaders, do room clearing exercises and things like that. Like, where is it okay not to know? Where is it okay to learn? So that when we build in a reflective practice at the end, like Shaun, when you had those team exercises and rooms are attacking each other, we don't learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on experience. So then now, it's not just what are the goals of my classroom environment today, but how through a really well-planned, intentional, debrief, reflective practice can I draw out from the participants where their attention was, how they solved for X, what they would do different next time, who they didn't collaborate enough with. So no, though, I don't have much to say about that, Chance.
just a little side note there. Yeah. I really appreciate that. I'm getting this this concept kind of working in my head. Earlier, Shaun, you had said something about users working within a construct, right? Like you're in an environment that has its own rule set, even though you have your own rule set, and being able to utilize your rule set into the construct is really important. But you have to be able to know what you can use and what you can't use, because eventually, if you keep using things that aren't appropriate for that rule set, you're going to be kicked out of that environment pretty quickly.
Well, there is one other option, if you don't mind.
By all means.
And so I'll refer back to the computer system network model at the time of a security-based lockdown system, for lack of a better term. And I'll use the correct terminology, so just give me a sec. The terms, if I recall correctly, are user default and roaming and mandatory. Yeah, so there's something called a user default, and then a local user, roaming and mandatory. So I'll quickly describe that because it'll be important to what I'm going to say. So the user default is what every user gets. We'll call that birth. So that user default exists before you're born. When you're born and enter into the system, we'll call it the matrix. When you enter into the matrix, your user default profile is assigned to you instantly. You get what you get. It's called a general frame of reference, for lack of a better term. And when you get that, a second later, whatever your next move is, whatever click you click or think you think or do that you do, it then becomes part of your own unique user profile, okay? So you've got a user default, and then you've got a user profile or a local user. Now, the two other things that are important is one called roaming profile and one called mandatory profile. And so if someone steps into my classroom, we'll call it, and they're unique, it's their day one, they've got a bare bones, know nothing, I know nothing, nobody knows anything profile. The moment they put their butt down in my classroom, they're now getting a unique profile. At least I'm assigning them a unique profile because, as I stated, my operational awareness, situational awareness in the classroom is full tilt. I know everything that's going on in my classroom, and here's why. Because I make it important. I don't wander into my classroom and slump down in my chair and not pay attention to what's going on, not reading the vibe, not reading the culture, not getting the synchronicity of the moment. That is not me. When I step in, I know exactly what's going on. And so that first-time user does not. But they're still creating their unique user profile day after day as they learn. Now, if that user is doing well, then I'll let it roam. A roaming profile is where you get to use your unique personalities, and now you have been given the liberty by the system administrator, me, to be able to roam within the network and get a richer user profile. Now you have a user profile in that classroom and that classroom. They're the same profile, but they're roaming. We could use that as an imaginary matrix traveling the world kind of thing. Now, if a user or an agent or whatever, a thing, is struggling in the system, is struggling within their user profile, there's a final profile called mandatory. And rather than being user.dat, it's user.man, mandatory. And that means when they step into the classroom, I can assign them a mandatory profile that they're locked into. They have certain things that they can do. They have certain liberties that are allowed, but nothing more than that. They're locked in. They can't extend or expand beyond what I lock them into called mandatory profile. So now to bring it into a coaching world or a teaching world or a real systems world, if someone is struggling to learn how to create a positive user profile within my system network, I'll mandatory their profile until they learn how to play properly, until they learn how not to hurt themselves, until they learn how to not blow up their computer. And so it's my job as the system administrator to be situationally aware in my classroom to understand how much I can let someone touch the stove and how many times I've got to lock them down so they stop touching the stove. I hope that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that builds out exactly what I was thinking, was the fact that as the person in charge, as the administrator or the coach or whatever it is, if you create an environment that where your students or athletes or anything like that are excited to learn, they're going to have more room to roam, right? They're going to be able to try new things and be able to, but still within a construct. There's still going to be an overarching rule set that they still need to abide by, but they just have less hallways and doors, much more open space. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, so there's two reasons for that, and one's positive and one's negative. So I don't want anyone to think out there that as a system administrator running the matrix, if someone annoys me, then I'm going to give them a mandatory lockdown. They're just not going to be allowed to play in the matrix kind of thing. What I will do is I'll lock someone down on a mandatory for two reasons. One is there's always that guy. There's always that guy who has to like get all crazy and start breaking things, and I'm going to put him into a mandatory because he needs to learn that you can't break things. And then there's that other guy who learns how to play the game, learns how to operate within the matrix, for lack of a better term, and is thriving, is doing really well, is kind of edging towards neoism, for lack of a better term. But then, as a system admin, I'm going to give him a mandatory. Because what a mandatory teaches you once you're learning how to play the game really well is to appreciate the game. Appreciate what you've been taking for granted. Start missing the thing that you're really good at. It's if you play with it well, it can encourage someone to get better at playing once they get out of the mandatory profile, for lack of a better term.
Interesting. Ben, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Well, one of the theories that was recently put in front of me with a group of soccer coaches was the cognitive load theory, which is three parts. Shaun, is this something you have some experience with?
I do, but I do, and I have some thoughts on it as well. But I'm curious to hear about this new material.
Well, it's not new. It's been a while, but it was somewhat new to me, and I've been trying. I think my challenge when I hear anything that's theory based is to immediately concern myself with where and how do I apply it? How you help people make sense of this. And if I'm thinking about, like, I would be this person coming into your classroom knowing nothing about computers, frameworks, systems, the matrix, and your job for me would be to reduce the extraneous load. This is the second part of the cognitive load theory. And it would be to help me focus on the right things, or as one of my good friends, Dave Hatters, says, give them everything they need, nothing they don't. And going into a new environment, and this is something for all leaders, coaches, teachers to consider. A new environment, what could be considered useless information? For example, it might be nice to have music playing when students walk into my classroom, but what if students are listening to that? Does that take the attention off the main thing, right? Or if there's whiteboards up and there's multiple problems up there, are there, for some, is it better just to erase all of that so I can help some of these neophyte learners just look at the main thing, right? Extraneous load, how do I reduce that, and make learning as simple as possible? If we were to look at this from a standpoint of walking into a classroom and there were 12 things that a learner could pay attention to, and you were forced to pick the top 3, how do you direct attention onto those things? Now, the challenge in that is, well, we have different levels of learning in the room. Going back to Shaun's example, when he walked in as a more mature, more ready, more seasoned learner from his time in service, this is about now going back to the mandatory constraints that Shaun was talking about. How do I make that learner by learner specific, right? So what may be considered extraneous load or too much information for one learner may be not enough for another, right? So it's like an individualized approach. This is where I think you see mastery level coaches or mastery level teachers, is they're not trying to give a canned approach to the learner experience. There's some things that everybody needs, and then there are going to be additional things where some learners may need more support and some learners may need more challenge. The part where, and I probably need to hear Shaun talk about it again, the part where I have a little bit disagreement, or maybe I'm still wrestling with it, rather than locking somebody in to make them appreciate what they have, I might be asking myself, okay, if this person's really cooking, they're a high performer, they're getting this information, how can I challenge them even more? They're in a performing stage. And rather than take away all the things that I love, to say, don't you love this stuff? You better be grateful for it. And I'm not saying that's the intent there. That's just kind of how I internalized it. I want to be asking, how can I up the ante, provide additional challenges, give them less time to perform specific tasks, or give them more tasks to perform in certain time, so that they know that as their kind of coach, teacher, leader, whatever, Shaun is somebody, or Ben is somebody, or Chance is somebody that not only supports me when I'm not getting it, but is also going to absolutely challenge me when they do start. Because what do all coaches or leaders or teachers, when teams, learners, anybody is really starting to get momentum, we say things like, I don't want them to get comfortable, right? You look at a team that's had a 3-game winning streak, 5-game unbeaten streak, whatever it is. When I'm talking to coaches, one of the things I'll hear them say is, oh, I don't want us to get comfortable, or I don't want us to start taking this for granted. Okay, well, in a training environment, how can we up the ante? If something was good enough 3 weeks ago, how do we make sure now that same standard is not good enough, because we know we've outperformed in those areas? So, just the two kind of, just to kind of summarize it, one is, I think the cognitive load theory is kind of a cool thing that can help anybody that's responsible for the transfer of information have an understanding about the learner themselves and the environment and the role of the teacher to help take information from working memory. And this is what Shaun's trying to do, I think, in that teacher mode, and take that information from working memory where it could be forgotten maybe the same day it was learned into long-term memory where under pressure, because Shaun taught me so well, I can recall this information. And I think that that's what we're trying to do as teachers, coaches, whoever. And then the second is when they start to get it, how can we provide appropriate challenge? Doug Lamov, I think, is an expert in this space. He is a world-renowned coach of teacher or teacher of teachers, somebody that is constantly looking at the learning environments and asking what great looks like.
Shaun, what do you got?
Yeah, we could end right there because it's kind of all been said. I think that's pretty awesome. So to Ben's point, he's right. I didn't lock down anyone in a mandatory profile as a form of punishment. It was to create a baseline. And that baseline being, you can be locked down so hard you can do almost nothing in this network. But beyond that, someone's got to learn in that moment, take that lockdown and think, where are the lessons in this? So what I would do, and I'd start this off right from day one, is I started creating fire team partners because it's my freaking classroom. And I'll run it in the most unorthodox way that I can in order to create the outcome that I think they deserve. And so I understood at that time how to out-of-the-box think and how to create results. So I did all kinds of things in my classroom. I would have a typical classroom where all the desks were in rows facing the whiteboards and my projector and all of that good stuff and learning just like it's a yawningly boring university program. And then sometimes I'd put all the desks in a circle, all facing in to each other. And sometimes I would take them and say, okay, fire team partners, everyone in corners, separate each other, and you can arrange your two seats however you want. You can face your opponents or you can face away from your opponents. Sometimes my classroom, I'd have everyone in a circle facing out from each other and putting them on task, getting them competitive on all kinds of things. And you can learn a lot about a classroom when you get unconventional. I'll tell you something that is interesting. When you have teams facing away from each other and put them on competitive task, they spend more time looking over their shoulder than they do look forward to their job because humans are competitive by nature. And if you set up the right environment, you can really dial up the execution of the task or the purpose-driven sense in that moment just by being playful in your classroom, by being creative in how you deliver the information. There's many ways to skin a cat, as the old saying goes. There's many ways to run a classroom. And I think there is no one way. I think there's 100 ways. And I think those 100 ways should be explored per semester so that you can better understand how to hybridize a classroom. That's my opinion. That's what I did with my class. That's how I saw great results from my students. Now, to Ben's specific point about mandatory profile lockdown, to teach someone a baseline, you can then build off that baseline. So what I would do is have fire team partners create profiles that would incrementally increase their abilities in a mandatory lockdown profile, and then have them try to either attack or mess with or try to break the system of the other quote-unquote system admin that was their partner. So the system admin would create a semi-restrictive profile, and then the other individual was responsible to try and break that profile, either break the network or break their own user profile or screw things up or explore or try to win or however you want to propose the word that works best for your head. But the two people would play together in a way that was restrictive and non-restrictive so that they could learn the tipping points on the mandatory versus roaming profile, if you will. I think I've answered Ben's point in the sense of I like to help someone understand their left and right of arcs. And then once they understand what their baseline is, we'll call it, it's now my job to expand that left and right of arc in any fashion that I can that is reasonably safe.
I think that like this is an absolutely perfect allegory to the military across the board, and I think it's kind of hilarious because we're talking about like basic training. When you first start, you're set under a rule set that is quite restrictive, and as you figure out how to work within that restrictive system, as you figure out how to fold your stuff properly and show up on time and the really, really basic things, you get handed more information. Okay, now you're going to learn how to use a rifle. Now you're going to learn how to do these things. Now you're going to expand it. The neat part about it is that you are expanding the bandwidth, the left and right of arcs of what you're capable of doing, but at the same time, you're actually overarchingly tightening some of the constraints over top of that, so that you're as to what you were saying earlier, Ben, is that how do you keep that standard moving when people are doing well? You keep increasing the standard, and the farther you make it in that, the more you go up that chain, you get Shaun. Right? You get the sniper, you get the pathfinder, you get the special forces. It's that trajectory of like, I'm just going to keep going, and if you screw up a little bit, okay, and then to keep going up. It's almost a one-to-one allegory. I think it's hilarious to watch, and I just wanted to put that out there because the conversation so far has been very computer and sports based, and there are, like you said, many ways to skin a cat. So I want to adapt the what we're talking about, and we use it as, it goes back to a point we made earlier, was that what we're doing is creating overlays that we can utilize in different systems, so that I can walk into a room full of politicians and I can overlay a system on my user profile and say, okay, and I can work in that system, and then I can work somewhere else with a new overlay, or not a new overlay, a previously used overlay. At least that's what I'm getting from all of this. Is that about where we're sitting?
That's how I run my life. That's how I've always run my life. And there's two things that I want to add to this. So Ben had raised a point earlier about kind of learning and its importance. Loosely, I'm going to infer that when I stepped in as a teacher to that classroom, it was super important to me that I delivered for my students. As an instructor, I think everyone should take that responsibility as a almost like a life-defining moment. If you're a teacher, you should be thinking about it decades later, and telling yourself that I did my best, I did a good job, I really, really poured myself into those students. It's a super important job, and I feel that it's not fully understood out there how, at least I took that responsibility. I took it like life and death responsibility. And that was easy for me to understand because my first classroom, as all of my classrooms ended up being, it was people who were down and out. They were on social welfare, or they were refugees that had come into Canada. This was their only crack at it. This is their last chance. I was looking at adults in front of me that could barely scrape 2 pennies together and had kids at home, and that if I didn't make them computer system engineers, it was frickin' bad for them. So I took it serious, man. And when I was taking it serious, I treated it like a tier 1 serious. Like this is a life-defining moment for these people, so I'm going to define my life in a way that takes it seriously. And it did. It defined my life, for sure. I can look back and understand all of the things that I learned through that process. Here's the other thing that I would like to add, the second thing. I think a real key determinant on how well you're doing as a teacher, or trying to help others learn, or trying to help other people understand how to use osmosis, is when I showed up to my classroom. I always locked my classrooms. No one got into my classrooms before I got in. I was first in always. And so my classrooms would start at 9 o'clock in the morning, run till 5, and then from 6 o'clock at night until 10 o'clock at night. I'd always be the first one in. But as I walked into the building, kind of 8:30ish, there'd be a pile of my students standing out front of the front door, either smoking or jawing or hanging out, chirping, swapping ideas, getting excited about the day. Getting excited about the day. As I'd show up, they'd say, "Morning, Shaun." And I'd say, "Morning, everyone." Walk right past them, open my door, and they were all lined up behind me to get in early, to show up and get in front of it. They were in the freaking game, because that's what I demand. If I'm going to give you my time, you give me your time. I'm in the game for you. You get in the game with me. If we're both in the game, well, freaking bring it. So a real indicator as a teacher or as an instructor or as a leader is if you're showing up early and the troops are there early as well, stoked to crack it out of the park that day, well, congratulations, you're doing something right.
Dang right. Ben, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I've never cared about wanting to learn about computers until I've listened to Shaun talk about it. And I mean that in the utmost respect. I'm listening to these hybrid classroom environments, chairs in, chairs out, competing. And Anders Ericsson, longtime professor, pretty well run, pretty much established as the guy that came up with the 10,000 hour rule that we've all heard about. He wrote the book Peak. He talked about the need for engagement as part of the learning process. Shaun used a classroom as this laboratory where the content was only part of the learning journey, and no two classroom experiences are the same. What I'm hearing in Shaun's story that I just love is something different than the traditional coach, learner, teacher approach, which is a lot of what informs our approach to teaching, leading, coaching is, well, who taught me or who coached me or who led me, and I'll just do that. And there may be some great merit to that, but there's also danger if those processes weren't best practices. I read a study some time ago where it looked at, what are the best ways to get the most out of people, right? And it was, a competitive approach, me against Shaun. Well, then it was a collaborative approach, me and Shaun work on something together. But then the third, which was most effective, was collaborative competitive, where it's me and Shaun are working together for a goal against two other individuals also in pursuit of that. It's probably why we love sports so much. It's a collaborative, competitive thing when you watch a football game or a baseball game. And so, that I've played around with that, knowing that when I'm working with groups, learning is the only sustainable competitive advantage. That is not Ben's quote, and I forget who said that quote, but Shaun, when I talk about the responsibility you had and how you took it as tier one priority, it's because you were changing lives. The information that people were getting, the learning that was taking place was leading to career opportunities for people that could completely change the trajectory of their life. Our bodies will break down. No offense, Chance, it's happening to you right now. But learning is a sustainable competitive advantage. And so you want to ask yourself quickly, are the people teaching me accelerating, expediting? Am I getting something out of this? Is this a classroom where I can't wait to get in Shaun's case, or I can't wait to get out? And those are two very different mindsets that are going to shape how much we take on information. The last thing this makes me think about is I can't remember where I read this, but it was the illiterate of the 21st century that will not be those that cannot read or write. It will be those that cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And for those of us that are kind of evolving in the career from maybe being that individual contributor or operator where you might have been the one on task, on target, doing the thing, and now you are one of the lucky few that is getting to teach, mentor, lead others how to do something, you better pause. I'll get the command hand out, not the
There you
finger.
go.
You
There you
better pause and ask yourself why your way of teaching or coaching is the right way. What underpins that? Is there science that underpins it? Are you collaborating with people who you would want to learn from? Are you reading on these things just because it's the way that got you success? Again, context is everything. You've got to have these pause moments where you're checking in on your methods, processes, philosophy of doing it. I would have loved to ask Shaun's students, why are you lining up so early? What is it about this experience that you can't get enough of that's causing you to be outside the door waiting like a concert that you want to get into? Yeah, I'll stop there.
I would hazard a guess on that because I've been reflecting on my experiences as a student throughout my life, and the people that I would do that for were, as Shaun put it, in the game. They were involved in the classroom every single day. Not, hey, that was a good class. You show up and the instructor is excited to be there. They're ready. They have all their stuff. Like there's a vibe to it. You walk into the room, you're like, all right. there's no question about what's going to happen. And I've walked into lots of classrooms that vibe was not there. And the instructor was sitting there in front of their computer waiting for the time. 9:00, cool. And then they begin. And it's unfortunate and it's interesting. I was thinking back on my time as an instructor as well in the military, and I didn't stand in front of the mirror and knife hand myself. I probably should have, but I did have one of those moments where I was like, what I know is not enough. If I'm going to put my stamp on these recruits that are coming through, because that usually it's more than likely the attitude of a lot of instructors is when these troops move on, if they're not up to my standard, the next person's going to be like, oh man, who taught you? And then that's going to be on me. So there was a mental shift when I became an instructor, and I went from, not really enjoying being in the military, not really enjoying my job and being a bit bitter to being a lot bitter to I need to show up every single day here. And I need to show up at the next level. So when I was looking at training plans that were, in my eyes, not up to snuff or not up to date or needed to be updated, that was my task. I need to make these up to date. I need to get these up to actual day-to-day processes because we were still dealing with Afghanistan. So those recruits were headed in that direction. So I was going to say a natural shift, but there were people that did not have that shift going from one to the other. So I really do enjoy the fact that you guys are talking about the having that discussion with yourself, because it needs to happen. If you're going to teach somebody, you're putting your stamp on them. And people are going to ask where you learned that, good or bad. So it's just something to add in there.
Well, it is, and I suppose it is I consider it as a minor importance that whoever I pass on as a candidate or as a student to the next individual, I briefly think, geez, I hope that my body of work with this person is going to be a little respected. But I don't really overly focus on that because that's not the important thing as far as I'm concerned. What is important is, and this is what I learned when I was young, when I was first taught how to teach, was I thought at the end of a session, I would think, man, I think I did a pretty good job there. I think I taught pretty well. I think I applied some of the instructional sequence of events that I was taught. I think I can do it better, but I think I did pretty good. That's how I used to think. But that's such a flawed perspective. But it's kind of the perspective that you've got to take at the start, where you concern yourself with how well you did as viewed through other eyes. Eventually, if you teach enough, you never concern yourself with that anymore. What you do concern yourself with is not how well you did, but how well they did. And so the teaching that I'm doing is almost inconsequential unless the results are showing up in front of me. It's what they become, not what I did, that I yardstick my own results against. And so by results, I'm going to refer back to what was mentioned, and that is the collaborative competitiveness in a classroom that I think is a really powerful tool that isn't used often enough because it's unconventional. And by the way, it's really like it's really uncomfortable when it is not predictable for some teachers. So this is what I would do every week, guaranteed this was happening, if not every freaking day. No matter what phase of the program the students were in, they could be typing whatever programming they were typing out, and I would say, all right, everyone sit back from their desks. They would sit back, and I'd say, stand up out of the classroom. And they'd all walk out. I'd close the door, lock it, and then freaking get on and mess with every single system. And then I'd say, all right, everyone back in, sit down, figure it out. And as fire teams, they would figure it out. And as they were figuring it out, I'd turn up the heat and say, the moment that you've got it figured out, you can start attacking the other teams. And so that was a way. Or another way was, all right, everyone sat back from their desks out in the hallway. I'd step out into the hallway with them and say, you two are attacking that team. You two are attacking that team. And when I'd say everyone into the classroom, they'd bomb burst to other stations and start attacking, messing with operating systems. And 60 seconds in, I'd say, okay, everyone back from their desk, out into the hallway. Now go fix your systems. And they'd all rush in and fix and then get ready to attack. There's many ways that you can increase competitiveness. There's many ways that you can increase collaboration. And by the way, many ways that you can increase morale. Do you know what's the natural outcome of setting up these kind of things? Even though it's minor frustrations in the moment for each team, they're having a few laughs out in the hallway, or they'd go outside when they're done and having a smoke break. Sometimes I'd walk out pretending that I was going for a bite to eat, and I'd saunter past them. Gee, Shaun, that was really fun. Can we do that again this afternoon? Or whatever. It was my way to dial into them in a low grade effort to get a read on my classroom outside of my classroom. Setting the right culture and then confirming the culture and then reinforcing the culture is something that isn't like, it just doesn't fall out of the trees. You've got to actively pursue it. You've got to actively reinforce it. But before you do any of those things, you've got to actively know what you want in a classroom for your students, not for you, for your students.
100%. Ben, got any thoughts?
That sounds like a good last word to me. Know who you're doing it for.
100%. I love it. We are almost at time anyway, so let's do some final thoughts, and then we'll shut her down for the day. I'll go right back to you, Ben. Though, anything about anything we've gone over, osmosis, learning systems, anything?
I was trying to kind of listening to Shaun and some of the questions from today. I was trying to formulate like, what would my top 5 takeaways be, from this? I definitely think at the top of the list, modeling the example. I think Chance, you talked about like demonstrating as a somebody responsible for the learning environment. Modeling an enthusiasm to be there, that's massive. That is massive because you can't fake that. So I'm just thinking, okay, what are my top kind of takeaways from this today? One, nothing great was accomplished without passion and enthusiasm. Shaun, it's like so clear his passion for this subject of systems, computers, engineering, that became contagious. And so that's number one is, you've got to own it. This idea of I'm in it with you, you're in it with me type of thing. Then number two right away is really trying to take an individualized approach. Who needs more care? Who needs more challenge? You can have a lesson plan, content, a topic that you need to teach. But learning and the environment is not static, it's dynamic. Who's getting it quickly? Who do I need to come alongside of and maybe cue and prompt and stay curious with? Um, I think all just maybe a third, and I'll pause after this one, is just how much of what was taught to me and who I wanted to be led by, how much of that am I bringing with me in my experience of leading, guiding, teaching, mentoring others? And contextually, what doesn't fit and where do I need to upskill myself in terms of different, theories, books, experiences, tools, processes, just to make the learning environment one, again, like Shaun's, where people are beating down the door, asking if they could stay longer. Hey, can we do this again? All those are code for, I love this. I love the way you teach.
100%. Shaun, some final thoughts?
Yeah, on that point, I think to reinforce it, between my day class and my night class, I would have an hour from 5 o'clock until 6 o'clock at night that was supposed to be just my time. But what would happen is my day class would stay late to hang out and learn more and just be in the game with me. But my night class would show up almost an hour early in some cases so that they could hang out with me, be in the game, and get stoked for their night class that started, at 6 till 10. So, that hour where I'd have my two classes together, how good was that? Because I've got my day class who are hardcore students in the game with my night class who are kind of part-timers but are now learning to get in the game with my day class because I'm freaking mega in the game. I mean, I loved it, man. When people were hanging out late and showing up early, to me it was a sign that I was doing some things that were right, but my students, not that they appreciated what I was doing per se, but they appreciated the game. The game. That's all we were playing was a good game in a good classroom with a good culture and a good focus on why they were there and a clear understanding of how much effort it would take to become what they wanted to become. And I was the guy that was going to crack a whip or dangle a carrot or help them become what they'd asked me to become. And between me and my students, we would figure out a way. There's so many ways to create success. But the first part of the equation is someone wants success. Someone needs success. Your purpose in that classroom is not to attend. Your purpose in that classroom is to smash it out of the park. And the only way that that's going to happen is if you're passionate about why you're in that seat. And if you're not showing up to your classroom 5, 6, 10 minutes early, ask yourself why. Ask yourself why you're there. Ask yourself if there's another choice that you could make to head somewhere else that you're passionate about. The classroom is really a proxy for your life. If you're showing up dragging your satchel down the hallway and slumping into your chair and you're bummed that you've got to spend another hour in another classroom, well, sit back and think about what you're doing. Either get excited about it or find another trajectory that you can get excited about. I think that's where I'd like to leave it.
Mm-hmm. There's, like you said at the very beginning, we could be here all day for the next week and probably into next month if we really wanted to sit down and talk about learning and osmosis and it. But I just wanted to really give my appreciation to both you guys. This has been a learning hour for me. I've been sitting here just like soaking up the knowledge between you two, and it's fantastic. So I really do appreciate it. Great conversation so far, and really, I don't have a whole lot to say in terms of a pithy statement at the end, but continue learning, continue growing, continue building, and you can do that with us every day here on the Collective. We'll see you tomorrow. Chimo.
Chimo.